In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and male and female in his own image.
He placed them in a garden paradise, and they lived in perfect harmony with God and his creation.
Until they allowed themselves to be tempted to disobey the only rule God gave them.
Their disobedience opened the door to sin and death, and it seemed Adam and Eve and all
humanity with them was doomed.
In desperation, Sisters Mary and Martha sent word to Jesus that their beloved brother Lazarus was dangerously ill.
By the time Jesus made it to their home, Lazarus was dead.
The sisters wept, Jesus wept, and Lazarus lay buried in a cold stone tomb.
The Israelites were free after decades of enslavement, only to find themselves trapped between their marauding former masters and the impassable Red Sea.
Terrified and distraught, they cried out to the Lord and to Moses that it would have been better for them to have remained in slavery than to die in the desert. All seemed lost for God's chosen people.
Israel stood on the brink of war with their old enemy, the Philistines. Their secret weapon was a nearly 10-foot giant whose armor alone weighed 125 pounds. Goliath mocked the Hebrews and their God, challenging them to a one-on-one fight between himself and their greatest warrior. A shepherd boy from Bethlehem was the only volunteer. Doubted by his own brothers and his king, David stood alone on the field of battle. Gripping his sling, he stared up at the massive Philistine, who laughed at Israel's pitiful excuse for a champion.
The faith of a Hebrew man by the name of Daniel was threatened by a pagan Babylonian king. When King Darius demanded that his people only pray to him, Daniel's prayers to the God of Israel never wavered. Caught in the act of faithfulness, Daniel was turned in as a traitor to the crown by the king's jealous advisors. His punishment, a night in the lion's den. Daniel sat alone in a cold, dark pit surrounded by hungry predators.
An angry wind rocked the little boat bearing Jesus' disciples across a dark lake. As they peered through the gloom, they noticed a figure seemingly walking across the water toward them. Jesus assured them he was no ghost, but Peter tested this by asking to meet Jesus on the water. When he stepped gingerly from the side, he found himself walking on the surface of the buffeting lake. But the moment he took his eyes off Jesus and stared at the rising waves, he felt the water consume his legs and waist as he sank into the dark waters below.
When the prophet Elijah told Naaman to wash himself 7 times in the Jordan River to rid himself of the leprosy, destroying his body, the great captain of the king of Aram's army scoffed. Hopeless and humiliated, his skin burning with the dread disease, Naaman stared into the river's
murky depths.
Dead. The one they called the Messiah, the promised one, was dead. Beaten, mocked, scorned, and humiliated. Jesus' last prayer breathed from a Roman cross must have haunted his disciples and followers for 3 dark days. Were they conned? Was Jesus a liar? Or was he just crazy? Were they crazy for believing him to be the one promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? While these questions, doubts, and despairs plagued their minds, the Son of God's body was sealed in a borrowed tomb.
With man it is impossible, but with God all things are possible.
In the same day that the problem of sin entered the world, God offered the solution,
his one and only Son, as payment for that sin.
With man, it is impossible, but with God, all things are possible.
Despite the warnings that Lazarus' body would have already begun to decompose, Jesus ordered that the tomb be opened. In a voice born from the authority of heaven, he called for Lazarus to come out. To the utter astonishment of those present, Lazarus stepped blinking into the sunlight, very much alive.
With man, it is impossible. With God,
But with God,
all things are possible.
God told Moses to raise his staff, and the massive waters of the Red Sea split in half, allowing the Israelites to cross an entire seabed on dry ground.
But with God, all things are possible.
All things are possible.
David returned Goliath's mocking threats with a promise that he would win this fight in the name of the God of Israel. Fitting a stone into his sling,
the man after God's own heart landed it squarely into the giant's forehead,
squarely
and
in
the
the giant's
Philistines'
forehead, and the Philistines' mighty warrior was dead before he hit the ground.
With man, it is impossible, but with God, all things are
all
possible.
things are possible.
The next morning, when the guards moved the seal from the entrance to the lion's den, Daniel stood alive and unharmed among the great beasts. God had shut their mouths against his faithful servant.
Nothing is impossible.
Before Peter's head could sink beneath the waves, Jesus was pulling him from the water. The minute he and Peter stepped back into the safety of the boat, the wind stilled. In awe, his disciples declared, "Truly, you are the Son of God."
With man, it is impossible, but with God, all things are possible.
Naaman washed the allotted 7 times and marveled at his clean, flawless skin fully healed. He committed his life to the God of Israel that very day.
On the brightest Sunday morning in history, Jesus stepped out of the tomb.
Jesus stepped out of the tomb as the victor over sin and the grave.
His sacrifice opened the doors of heaven to all who accept him as the Lord and Savior of their lives.
with man it is impossible, but with God,
But with God.
But with God,
But with God,
All things are possible.
All things are possible.
All things.
All things.
All things.
Nothing is impossible.
With man, this is impossible. But with God,
But with
all
God,
things
all
are
things
possible.
are possible.